Hi guys, it's George here at Optics Warehouse again, and today I'm going to give you a bit of a crash course on mount selection and what you need for your setup. It's probably the most common questions we answer are, what mounts do I need? So I thought try and give you guys a bit of advice, point you in the right direction. If you like this type of thing, please like, comment and subscribe, and if you've got any questions, put them down below. Alright, so in front of me here, I've got the selection of Untitled rings, just to try and help demonstrate some of what I'm talking about. So, first thing you're going to need to know when selecting your mounts is what diameter tube you have on your scope. So, most common are going to be 1 inch and 13 mil. You do see, or starting to see an increase in 34 mils. And there are 40 mils and some others, but in general it's going to be 1 inch or 30 1 inch or 30 millimeter diameter mounts. And what I'm talking about there is this circumference there, that diameter there. So that's a 30 mil, and then this is a 1 inch, and as you can see it's quite a lot smaller. The way to find that out, some people you can just tell by looking if you're experienced enough. Doesn't take very long, or at the very least it's going to be in your scope's user manual. So next thing you need to figure out, what rail is on your rifle. So for air guns, rimfires, most common, well I say most common, it's probably a 50-50 split really between 9 to 11 mil dovetail, which is, it can either be just two lines 9 to 11 mils apart going along the action. You see that quite commonly on spring guns, which just cut straight in, or it can be an actual raised up portion of the action. See something like the air arms or the Vira, something like that. Or the next most common would be Picatinny weaver rail, something like this, where you see you've got the slots in there like that. Is going to be, they're the two most common. You may have, especially if you're going into more centerfire stuff, a firearms manufacturer Pacific rail, Tikka, CZ, all do it. Well, most of them do it, unless they're putting a weaver rail on top. So once you've decided once you've just found out what rail that you've got, then you need to look for a ring that has the combination of 30, say, I know you've got 30 mil tube on a weaver rail scope. You need to look for a mount that is 30 mil diameter with a weaver base to it. Something like, oh that's 1 inch, or we'll go with 1 inch. 1 inch diameter with a weaver base, something like that. So the next thing you need to figure out is probably how high you need your mounts. This is probably the most common part where people need advice on. Now, the Untitled rings are really good in the fact of they don't say low, medium, high. They just tell you 8, 12, 6, whatever mil it is, however high it's going to raise that scope, it just tells you. The measurement you need to know is from the base of the clamp there, or top of the clamp rather, to this section here. This is called the saddle, and that measurement there is how high it's going to lift your scope up. Now, how high do you want your scope? Well, it's going to depend on the scope and what you're doing. So, larger objective, obviously you need a higher mount. If you're sort of from your 50 mil to higher, or 50 mil to 56 mil objectives, typically that's a high mount. The 40, 44 mil objectives, that's going to be mediums, and then going lower than that, obviously low mounts. Where I'm saying typically it'll be those measurements, that is if you're trying to keep the scope as low to the barrel as possible. You may be wanting to actually get that scope higher up. I know a lot of FT guys do that. Reason being is it can help even out the gap between their adjustments, then you can get some benefits of shooting down your trajectory as well. In that case, you're going to be looking for extra highs. You may even put riser blocks, stuff like that, but that's a bit beyond the scope of this video. So how do you find out how high you need it? Well, there's a couple of things you need to consider. If it's an air gun, do you have a magazine sticking proud of your action? And how much so? So how much do you need to clear it with? So, for example, I've got a Crow MPO2 at home. Magazine does stick a little bit proud, but it's not very much, so I can get away with mediums. And that keeps the scope nice and low. I know some of the FXs with their higher capacity magazines, or the day states, they stick quite proud as well. That is, you're going to want highs, and it's purely being limited by that magazine. The next thing you need to consider as well, if you are trying to get as close to the barrel as possible, is what drop you have from your action. So if you've got your action here, that's where you're mounting your scope, and your barrel's over here, there's usually a drop between them, there's a difference. That can mean that actually you can get a bigger objective scope with lower mounts. So you just need to figure out how high you need that lifted off. A rough way of doing it, it's a bit rudimentary, is gun there. So you have your gun there, hold your scope up to it. So if that's your gun, you're holding your scope up here from the objective end, get it fairly close to the barrel and sort of guesstimate that measurement. As I said, as a rough guide, 50, 56mm objectives need highs. Anything bigger, extra highs. 42 to 44, mediums. Anything smaller, lows. I know with some of the air guns now, the more bullpup tactical styles, FX impact, stuff like that, you've got quite a pronounced raised rail, so you can get away with medium and low mounts for bigger objective scopes, because that drop is a lot more pronounced. So now I'm just going to go over some certain features of the mounts that you might want to look out for and clear up some confusion. So I'm going to start off over here. These are Rusan 30mm high tactical rings. Now, when they say tactical rings, what most manufacturers are doing when they say that is it's a 6-screw cap. Hope that's clear there on the video. That's usually what they mean by tactical. Does provide a little bit more clamping. It's not necessarily doing a huge amount, it's more for looks to my opinion. They do typically as well they are typically made out of aluminium. That's not to knock them, it's just makes them nice and light. So if you're tactical, you're trying to reduce weight wherever you can, if you're running and gunning. So that's tactical rings. Next rings, these are Tikka Rings. Now if you look at the base of there, just looks like a dovetail, but if I take these, now hoping you guys can see that this here is a 9 to 11mm dovetail, this is a Weaver Pacific Tikka Pacific rail there, and you see that's a lot wider. This is why it's important to know what rail you're mounting to, because if you got these, they definitely wouldn't fit, and if you bought these for an air gun, definitely not going to fit. Just while I've got these here, you can see that is your clamp. Now when I'm speaking to people on the phone, it can get a bit muddled when I say things like clamp, base, stuff like that. If I'm usually, when you're talking about a set of complete rings like this, where you've got the ring base together, this is your base, that's your clamp, that you can sort of use those terms interchangeably. Something you might want with rings is something with what's called quick release. As you can see here, these have a lever on the side that you just wind around and boom, you can take your rings off. Why would you want that? Well, could be that it's a night vision scope that you want to swap on off against multiple rifles. Could be that you've just got multiple optics that you're changing between one scope, whatever. What I do suggest if you're looking for quick release, invest in a good quality pair, because that way you can guarantee, or you get closer to guarantee keeping your zero either way, if you're changing optics around, you are going to realistically need to check that before you use it. So, how to know if it's a weaver or dovetail ring, just to sort of reiterate some of what I've talked about before. You see there on the bottom of this ring, got a little bar there. Now, usually that bar will go right across, or sometimes it goes right across, sometimes you see two, sometimes it's just the one, sometimes it's the bolt itself that acts as that. All rings of that sort of design, they're going to be a weaver Picatinny. And then all rings with just a plain clamp base there, that's going to be your dovetail style. Now I'm just going to go for a quick little bit on rails. What rails do I need? Well, most manufacturers make rails for a very wide variety of rifles. And for example, this is one for a CZ 5550 in the short action. So when you're trying to select a rail for your action, you need to know exactly what model gun you've got and then what size or variant of the action you've got. Most have a short / standard action and a long action for the more magnum or bigger calibers. Typically 308 and under is going to be your short actions, and over that they tend to go to the long action. Some manufacturers do a medium or one in between, but for general purposes it's a short or long action. So another thing to consider with rails is, do you need built-in MOA? As you can see there, this one says 20 MOA. What does that mean? So I don't know how well you're going to be able to see this, but if you can see that it's slightly thinner at that end than it is this end. What that's doing is slanting the rail slightly down so that your scope is pointed slightly more towards your barrel. What that does effectively is give you an extra amount of adjustment in your scope. So when you're shooting it at longer ranges or extreme close ranges, you're not running out of adjustment. Now, in air guns, it is really at the extremes that you would ever need that. In centerfire, it depends on your cartridge, what distance you're shooting, how flat it shoots, ballistic coefficients, all that type of stuff. It's quite technical really whether you need it. If you were ever unsure whether you needed MOA built into your rail, it's never going to hurt to have it, but it might not, depending on the distance. Typical hunting distance, for example, if you're zeroing at 100 yards with your centerfire and you're never going to change it, you don't need it really. If you've got a 223 and you're shooting, say 600 yards, you might want to start considering it because of the drop on that round. It's all down to what you're doing. So I know that's gone through a lot of information there. I hope that's made things a bit easier for you guys. If you've got any questions, please comment them down below, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers, bye bye.